Extending a hand of friendship. The Turkish president's in Germany on a mission to mend ties. He's not seen eye to eye with the German Chancellor on many issues recently. What drove these two NATO allies apart? And can this visit help restore this broken relationship? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm Peter Dobbie. This is Inside Story from Doha. The Turkish president is in the middle of a three-day state visit to Germany. It is a critically important tour for Recep Tayyip Erdogan as Turkey faces an economic crisis brought on by the crash of its currency, the lira. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel could be part of the solution. But behind the cordial greetings and the joint news conferences, it has been a rocky relationship now for years. The two leaders have traded barbs over everything from human rights abuses to political campaigning and migrants. But with 3 million Turks living in Germany, it's always going to be a relationship that needs to work. Jonah Hull has more now on Merkel and Erdogan's meeting from Berlin.
Well, first and foremost, of course, this was a full state visit, but also a meeting between two political leaders with very different trajectories. Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan now strengthened with sweeping new presidential powers. Chancellor Merkel of Germany widely seen as a political lame duck. But two leaders who appear to recognise that their countries share important common concerns and interests, even though deep disagreements between them were hard to hide. So there was talk of the Syrian conflict. They share ideas about how to end it. They've announced a new meeting bringing in the French and the Russians in October. There was talk of the migration and refugee crisis. Turkey currently holding back on its soil 3.5 million Syrian refugees desperate to make it to Europe. There's economic crisis, Turkey's worst in 15 years, German banks and businesses badly exposed. And the issue, of course, that Turkey, as a NATO member, is currently at loggerheads with the Trump administration and the United States. Perhaps Germany can help to unlock that little problem. And so in her comments reflecting the difficult nature of these talks, Chancellor Merkel said this, that we hope for a common strategic and good relationship. But on the issue of a free and open democratic society, she said, we perhaps have different perceptions of what that looks like. Well, President Erdogan responded that he hoped for a win-win relationship between Turkey and Germany, but he said that both countries needed to respect each other. The clear implication, don't lecture us on democracy, on human rights, on the judiciary. A difficult meeting, as I said then, a balancing act, an exercise in political expediency rather than choice. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera for Inside Story in Berlin.
And here's a taste of some of the issues Mr. Erdogan and Mrs. Merkel have been touching on.
I expressed to the esteemed Chancellor that the Turkish economy is built on strong foundations. We have taken structural steps to respond to the speculation-based challenges in our economy. We are prepared for any difficulties in our economy, just as we are prepared to meet any other challenges in any other respect. We feel that the relations between Germany and Turkey are very important, and we want to advance a win-win scenario.
Turkey has achieved enormous results when it comes to hosting 3.5 million Syrian refugees. We discussed the subject of Idlib, and we want a meeting with the Russian president, the French president, myself, as well as President Erdogan, and we're aiming to host a meeting in October to discuss Idlib.
OK, let's get going. Let's bring in our guests today. Joining us from Berlin is Thorsten, the co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute in Istanbul. Joining us from Turkey is Sinan Beykent, columnist and political analyst, and from Lancaster in the UK, Maurizio Zanardi, international economist at Lancaster University. Welcome to you all. Thorsten, coming to you first. Demonstrations today and tomorrow planned against Mr. Erdogan and his visit. Does he understand why, do you think?
I think he understands why, that there are people who are very unhappy with his authoritarianism. These are typically the people who he puts in prison in Turkey, but they're free here in Germany, as it should be, and they're free to demonstrate. So I think he gets a glimpse of what an open society looks like and what opposition in an open society looks like.
Sinan Beykent in Istanbul. How easy or difficult is it for Mrs. Merkel to, on the one hand, roll out the red carpet and, on the other hand, come up with some uncomfortable truths, because it's not an easy sell for her?
Well, in international relations, you should sometimes sacrifice your ego for the better cause, you know, for the sake of your country. So Germany, at one hand, needs Turkey to assure European security, but also Merkel has the pressure of the public opinion in Germany to assert that President Erdogan's policies may sometimes drift towards authoritarianism. But as I said, in international relations, even if you don't like your partner or you have no sympathy for him or her, you should swallow things up and look at what's best for your country.
Maurizio Zanardi in Lancaster, you're an economist who specialises in this region, on this region. Who's messed up the Turkish economy? Is it the Turkish economy, Turkish politicians? Is it Mr. Erdogan? Or is it Donald Trump with his tariffs?
Well, I have to say that, as a matter of fact, it's a joint act, if you want. The Turkish economy has not been in great shape for some time, but has not been in a dramatic situation. For sure, the sanctions that Donald Trump has imposed on Turkey are taking their toll. And the cumulative effects, the depreciation of the Turkish lira, and therefore the problems in international trade relationships that then translate to the domestic economy, are exacerbating the issues, the political and economic situation that President Erdogan is facing. So in a way, as we think that he's visiting Germany, to me, as an international economist, the question comes to mind, also following on the previous contribution. He may not like Angela Merkel very much, but maybe he likes her more than what is his current position vis-à-vis President Trump. Clearly, the relationship between Turkey and Germany, Turkey and the EU have not been very warm recently, but possibly the relationship with the United States are even colder. And so here is a balancing act politically, but even more so economically, on what President Erdogan can try to do in order to try to come out to solve the economic issues that he's facing, keeping in mind that I believe he's also facing a very strong political constraint.
Sinan in Istanbul, let's just talk specifics for a second here. What Merkel wants from this two-day get-together and also what Mr. Erdogan wants. He wants the Fethullah Gulen movement designated as a, quote, terror organisation. He must know that is not going to happen because the German line has been consistent. There is simply not enough evidence of that.
Yes, but I really don't think that the meeting today was about that. You know, it wasn't about the human rights issue in Turkey. It wasn't about the requests from President Erdogan about the PKK or Fethullah Gülenist organization members. Warrants, etc. It wasn't about that. We should adopt here a macro look to the situation. Let's face it. Both countries are fed up actually with the American unilateralism. So on one hand, Germany faced the Trump administration's harshness on especially three issues. One, the trade tariffs. The second, about the Russian gas. And the third, about the Iranian embargo. On the other hand, Turkey is facing also difficulties with the Trump administration, namely, one, the currency crisis that we are going through. The second is related to the detainment of Brunson. And thirdly, we have this issue about the American sponsoring of PKK in northern Syria. So this is this meeting today, this summit, this bilateral summit today, was just to pave a way, I think, for an Eurasian solution. for the region. So I think there is a new axis forming today between Berlin, Moscow, Ankara, Tehran, and maybe also Paris. So all of these countries, maybe France is an exception here, but all of these countries are fed up with American unilateralism and excessive policies that displayed by Trump administration. So this meeting is a prelude, as you can say, to a bigger solution that is coming up today. It wasn't about the human rights violations, the so-called violations, or the PKK members or the FETÖ Gülenist members. It wasn't about that. The media has covered up only these parts, these features of the meeting, of the press conference.
Okay.
But it was much more than that.
Let's just turn this lens around for a second. Thorsten Bennett in Berlin. 3 million Turks live and work in Germany. 2/3 of them voted for him. Is that an area that Merkel has to be sensitive to?
No, I think that's an area, but I'd like to say a few words on Sinan's fantasy of this Eurasian solution to supposedly joint problems we have with the United States. This neo-Ottoman foreign policy didn't quite work out, so there's a new fantasy, it seems. And I don't think the meeting between Mr. Erdogan and Chancellor Merkel was primarily about joint problems that Germany and Turkey have with Mr. Trump. It was about joint interests and differences and an honest conversation on that. And it's in Germany's interest to have a stable and prosperous Turkey. For that, you need good economic relations and good economic policies on the part of Turkey also. But for that, you also need the respect of human rights, the freedom of the press, and you need to stop interfering. And I come back to the Turkish-German community here. You need to stop harassing citizens that are living in Germany, that are being harassed by Mr. Erdogan's government. So there's joint interests also regarding Syria, and it's true that Mrs. Merkel announced a joint summit with Mr. Putin, Mr. Erdogan, and Mr. Macron. It's useful and helpful for the French, the Germans, and the Turkish side to coordinate ahead of the meeting with Russia, because there's some joint interests on that front. We all want an end to the human suffering, humanitarian catastrophe in Syria. But this very convenient and somewhat funny framing I heard from Sinan as this kind of new big Eurasian fantasy, including Russia, which doesn't work at all from a Berlin perspective. We don't like these axes anymore anyway. That's a non-starter, and that's more a fantasy than reality.
Let's just take that debate a little bit forward. Briefly, Sinan, if you're living in fantasy land, is there a grain of truth there in what Thorsten is saying, in as much as every country operates basically off two bank accounts? Both of Turkey's bank accounts are massively in the red, and there's not enough money in the system for Erdogan to dig his way out of this financial hole. It is that bad. And on top of that, he's scared away potential investors because of the way he started looking in on how your central bank does what it does. International money does not want to come into your country.
Let me put out first that calling the Eurasian solution a fantasy is what a pro-Atlantic figure is what a pro-Atlantic figure might say. You know, this works. This is cold and pure realism, because when on one side American administration, namely the Trump administration, is pushing the trade tariffs all the way through. wants to impeach Germany from buying the Russian gas and dictates the Iranian embargo, well, the Eurasian solution comes up by itself. You know, this is not a fantasy. This is not a dream, a funny dream, as the Sir called it, but it's pure reality. And this is what's going to happen, as you will see during the summit, the upcoming summit between France, Germany, Russia, and Turkey.
Okay, and the clock is always against us, gentlemen, on this program, so we've addressed the financial issue. Let's just wrap up our financial discussion, though, with Maurizio Zanardi at Lancaster University. Is it as simple, Maurizio, that he has a begging bowl, or if he gets money pumped into the economy, when will it happen and what would it be?
Well, but who's going to pump the money into the economy? I mean, here is a strange situation where there is a big question on the independence of the central bank in Turkey. He openly said that he doesn't like interest rates. The Central Bank of Turkey increased the interest rate a couple of weeks ago, possibly not enough to countervail the effect of the drop in the Turkish lira. So I don't think, following on some of the comments earlier, that the meeting today is going to bring any direct effect in terms of Germany offering to pumping money into the Turkish economy or any other dramatic solutions. From my perspective, and this is on the boundary between politics and economics, if President Trump was not in the White House, I don't think that Erdogan would have been in Berlin today, both for political and economic reasons. Now, President Trump is in the White House, is doing massive measures vis-à-vis tariffs, vis-à-vis the gas market and so on. That puts, if you want, Mr. Erdogan and Angela Merkel on the same side in the sense of being pushed by President Trump, but on very different dimensions. President Trump has imposed a sanction on Turkey on political grounds. Mr. Trump has imposed tariffs on the European Union and other countries on economic, let's say, grounds. But even if one may want to dispute that, these are very different grounds. So it's not, I don't think that European Union or Germany can create an alliance, an economic alliance with Turkey to try to have an upper hand vis-à-vis Donald Trump. If an alliance, if an economic alliance would be needed with partners that are bigger, and here I'm thinking possibly of Japan on the other side of the world. So here, the Turkish economy is in a very strange position because it is the result of political constraints, and I don't think that Mr. Erdogan would like to give up much face and in real terms to the request of President Trump. But at the moment, the American economy can put a lot of pressure on Turkey. And the meeting with Angela can possibly help calm down the markets from an economic perspective a little bit, but cannot offer a solution of money, cannot offer a dramatic solution of saying, yes, we can say we will try to invest more, but markets will decide depending on what is the situation and what are the policies of the Turkish government vis-à-vis the rest of the world and internal policies. So coming to the wrapping up of the financial question, unfortunately, I don't really see a solution. On the one hand, I hope that the central bank will maintain its independence and probably act again to raise interest rate. But even the raising of interest rate can only have a bite as so much as there is something that is tangible and that the markets can perceive as beneficial to their side and also beneficial in terms of long-term solution.
I just want to interrupt you there, Maurizio. Just want to interrupt you there for a second to put that point to Thorsten Bennett in Berlin. Is the central assumption here that everyone's been speculating on, Thorsten, in effect completely flawed? Because everyone's been saying, basically, it might come down to what happens in the next couple of weeks in Idlib, because Angela Merkel is politically weaker than she was before the German election. Refugees, she can't go with the idea of more refugees trying to get out of Syria across the border into Turkey. And she's got to say to Mr. Erdogan, look, you've done a really, really good job with the refugees. Nobody can take that away from you, but I will, in effect, help you with your economic situation if you help me with the refugee situation.
I mean, Turkey has an interest in, first of all, it's Turkey that hosts most refugees, more than 3 million. 3.9 million, I think, in total, and it needs to be commended for that. That's a remarkable achievement on the part of Turkey. So Turkey has its own interest in not having an increase in the number of refugees. even if the situation escalated, they won't be in Germany tomorrow. But we have every humanitarian impulse in order to address the situation in Idlib. But I don't think there's a quid pro quo on the economy and Idlib the way you portray it. Germany has a general interest in a stable Turkey. We don't want Turkey to go down the drain economically, because German businesses are invested and they would like to do business in a prosperous and stable Turkey. We have 3 million Turkish Germans who are deeply connected with Turkey, and we're afraid of what would happen if Turkey destabilized politically. So we have every interest to work together with President Erdogan for measures that, as you put it before, that increase investor confidence.
Okay, Sinan Bekan in Istanbul. Is there a very, very subtle calculation on the part of Mr. Erdogan? And it's this: he knows full well that he can work with Mrs. Merkel. He's betting Mrs. Merkel can work with him, although there is a rider, a codicil, which is this: she has to implicitly say to him, I'll work with you, but I don't like your political direction. I don't like where I think you're continuing to take your country.
Yes, but on the other way, Erdogan doesn't like Miss Merkel either. I mean, when a country shells, Gülenist terrorists, PKK terrorists, it's normal that you have initial differences, but on the other hand, when it comes to international topics,
sorry, Sinan, just to interrupt you there. Are you saying now? Are you claiming that Germany is sheltering PKK terrorists? Is that what you just said?
Yes, of course.
That's your allegation.
That's a fact.
I just want to put a rider on that for our audience.
It's not an allegation. It's a fact.
Okay.
It's a fact.
You're saying
Everybody
it's a fact.
knows it.
Carry on with the point you were making.
So, but when it comes to international topics, things change, and you have to collaborate in order for the sake of your country. I mean, as I said before, Mrs. Merkel wants to assure the European security, and in order to assure the security, she knows that she has to collaborate with Mr. Erdogan, who in times of crisis says that if Germany continues to meddle in our internal affairs, that he would open the borders and let the refugees go towards Germany. So this is not an ideal point. I know it, and everybody knows it. But
okay.
When on the other hand you have Germany
briefly, Sinan.
PKK terrorists, Gülenist terrorists.
Okay, I just want to give the last 30 seconds of the programme, please, to Maurizio Zanardi at Lancaster University. I think it'd be fair to say in international politics and diplomacy, assumption is the mother of all bad relationships. They may not like each other. Do they trust each other?
I don't know. I mean, here it's a meeting that is needed because there is some sort of a common enemy. How much they can trust each other here, as the previous speaker was saying, there are major differences politically, ideologically between the two countries. Can they have? But they need each other. The European Union also needs Turkey, but Turkey recently was not that involved with the European Union. Now it becomes a need because of having a different front to cover. So can they trust each other? I don't know. Can we trust President Trump as well? We don't know. So it's a big uncertain situation, a big uncertain world. So I will see today's visit, the 3 days in Germany, as a starting point of a conversation, and what it will lead to is very much in their hands. Both sides will have to show, possibly from a European perspective, more the Turkish side will have to show a little more of actions, to put actions behind their words and what they would like to achieve.
And I think that's a good place maybe to end our conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much. They were our guests, Thorsten Benner, Sinan Bekent and Maurizio Zanardi. And thank you to you too for your company. You can see the show again anytime via the website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter @AJ Inside Story, or I'm @PeterDobbie1. From me and the entire team here in Doha, thanks for your time. We'll do it all again tomorrow. Bye-bye.